Okay, we're good to go.
All right, thank you, Sean. And good afternoon, everyone. And also to those who are watching or through stream, welcome to our public meeting this afternoon. So roll call, only Councillor Houston, who is on personal leave, will be absent this evening for our meeting. All other members of council are present and accounted for. Before I start, I want to do a land recognition that we acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties agreements between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Lenni Lenape and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around our Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi and Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis nations. To the members, any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the agenda as presented to you this afternoon? Hearing none, we'll have that duly noted. But we do have delegations, and so I'll pass this on to our Director of Infrastructure and to just introduce our two guests that will be presenting this afternoon on the Oldcastls Stormwater Master Plan. And so I'll call on our Director Bartnick to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to introduce Mr. Alan Michaud and Miss Liz Michaud from Landmark Engineers. They're here this evening to give a presentation on the Oldcastles Stormwater Master Plan. It's a plan that the town has been working on with Landmark for a number of years, and we're very excited to bring it forward to you today. There is also a report on the agenda with the recommendations for the report to be received, and that we proceed with advertising the notice of study completion. I also wanted to give special thanks to John Henderson as well, our Manager of Engineering Services. He's been a great resource throughout this entire study, and he's been managing the project on behalf of the town. So without further ado, I know we have quite a lengthy presentation, so I would like to turn it over to the delegations if I could. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bartnick.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And good evening, Mayor and councillors. Yeah, so the Oldcastles Master Plan has been a culmination of about 3 years of study, or 3 years plus. We think we've got a great plan here. We've optimized the solutions. We've gotten some good feedback, and we've really optimized these solutions to fit with what is a pretty challenging site, particularly in the retrofit areas of the business park. So we think we've got a great plan that has really optimized solutions within with the challenges of an existing development. And within that 3 years, we've got a very comprehensive understanding of that system. We've been out to the field numerous times. We've gotten some good rains within that study period. We had a good rain September 2018, a 5-year storm. We had a really big rain August 2020, about a 100-year storm, so a very big event in August 2020. And we also had a good and interesting rain in January 2020 as well, about 63 mils in mid-January, with some snow melt and thawing conditions, saturated soil conditions. So a very good comprehensive understanding of that site, of this site. And I think and so tonight what we're going to present is just an overview of that master plan, what we've analyzed, what we found, and the solutions that we are recommending as part of that plan. Next slide. So this is just a bit of a key plan and a site plan just to situate those that don't know the Oldcastle area. So we're south of Highway 401. The main roads are Walker, North Talbot. Like I said, primarily business park. There are a few little residential areas. The Chicharo there is just kind of that southwest corner of Walker, North Talbot. If you can see that on the slide. So that's where we're located. And yeah, next slide. So the main objective of the project can be summarized as our problem opportunity statements here, which reads, the study was intended to evaluate the current stormwater system capacity of the Oldcastle hamlet, identify capacity needed for the existing as well as projected future demands, and develop a strategy to implement proposed improvements. So some of the steps that we've taken to achieve that is inventory, assess, confirm the capacity of the current stormwater system, identify, define local drainage issues, areas of concern, review and assess the stormwater needs for future development, identify and assess potential improvements, and prepare a prioritized strategy for implementing the proposed improvements. Next slide. So the study did follow the environmental assessment master plan process. It was we followed that process for master plans approach 2. It addresses phase 1, phase 2 of that process. As Phil had said, Liz Michaud is on the call as well. I'll be presenting most of the slides, but she is on as a delegate as well to answer any specific questions. But so this slide is some additional discussion within the slide, but the main intent to pass along is that we were following that process. Next slide. Again, quite a bit of text here, but the take home here is that there was quite a bit of public consultation. We believe we went over and above the EA requirements. We had 2 public information centers. We had numerous letters to key stakeholders throughout the project. Any stakeholder where there was a property involved, whether it be for a stormwater pond or easements or new sewers that we're proposing, or even surface easements for some overland relief, as we'll present in some of the subsequent slides here tonight. All those there was targeted letters sent to those individual stakeholders that were affected. We got some great feedback from those letters. So quite a bit of consultation. We also had info packages that went out to First Nations throughout the project as well. Next slide. So just a bit of context here on the current stormwater system. The overall context, within the study area, we're at the what we call the headwaters or the high end of 3 separate watersheds within the region. So we have what's in the red, which is the area south of Highway 3, that's going towards River Canard, kind of flowing in a southwesterly direction. And then we have the area in the yellow, the Wolf Drain subwatershed, that ultimately ends up in Turkey Creek, that heads more westerly. And then we have the area in the blue that is part of the Little River watershed. So those 3 watersheds going to 3 different, or the study going into 3 different watersheds. There's some sub-watersheds there defined as well. And it's ultimately drained by municipal drains, as you see in the blue. A lot of the blue lines there, those are the municipal drains. Ultimately, all these areas are drained by municipal drains and outletting either into the city of Windsor or the town of LaSalle. Next slide. Actually, yeah, sorry, skip this slide. I have to go to the following slide. So this is just a bit of context again, showing the topography. And again, we talked about those 3 areas and that drainage divide going into 3 watersheds. And here with the topography, you can see with that color heat map, there's a pretty clearly defined ridge kind of running along, more or less along Walker Road. And you can see how that how the land is sloping easterly and westerly from Walker. Next slide. Oh, sorry, back one. So some of the next slides here, we'll get into a little bit of the analysis, what our findings were and our modeling approach. So in order to analyze and assess the performance of the existing as well as the future proposed drainage system, we undertook a detailed hydraulic model of the study area as well as its downstream receiving bodies, again, going into the city of Windsor and the town of LaSalle. The model approach consisted of a dual drainage model. So we were modeling both the minor drainage system, which consists of the storm sewers, drains, culverts, as well as what we call the major system, which is your overland surface routes, primarily modeling the streets, as well as other surface features. We undertook a calibration based on actual field observations from 5 separate flow monitoring locations and 6 separate rainfall events that we collected over the course of the study. And that data was measuring both water levels and flow velocities. And then finally, we did an assessment of the performance under standard design storms, both 2-year and 100-year return periods. Next slide. So this shot here is showing, or image here is showing the model results under that 2-year storm. What you're seeing the local system now. You're seeing the green lines are representing the sewers, the orange lines representing the culverts, the blue lines representing the open drains. And then you see some of the colored circle nodes representing some minor surface ponding under this event in the light blue. That would be 0 to 0.15 meters. Yellow, you're looking at 0.15 to 0.3 meters. Orange, you're looking at 0.3 to 0.5 meters surface ponding. And then in the red, you're in excess of 0.5 meters. This is where you start getting into some access issues. Even arguably at 0.3 meters, you're getting into some access issues for some vehicles. And that is typically the current design standard, the modern design standard for new developments. Yeah, so you're seeing that there's a little bit of surface ponding under that 2-year event, but generally the system is adequate. There's a bit of a red node and an issue at the Black Acre Sag, which there's been some road closures there as part of our study. We have a few photos that will show to that effect. So it's identifying that there are a few problem areas, but overall the system's functioning fairly well. Next slide. So as we talk about some of the surface flooding under that 2-year event, the current, as I mentioned, the current drainage infrastructure is generally designed, constructed to a lesser standard that would be prescribed today. So a standard today wouldn't have any surface ponding under a 2-year event. However, we note these systems can still provide an adequate level of service in conveying stormwater for most rainfall events. A full upgrade of the system to conform with modern standards would be highly impractical, disruptive, and expensive. And the model was first used to identify and address the parts of the existing stormwater system that are significantly undersized and have deficient drainage capacity, where we are looking at frequent and prolonged nuisance ponding that will result. So based on our review of the drainage model, our observations in the field, consultations with residents, as well as Town of Tecumseh staff, existing drainage problems were identified, and we summarize those in some of the following slides. Next slide. So some of these, so to summarize these points here and follow with the numbers. So at number 1, that's at Outer Drive. So the Wolf Drain culvert crossing significantly undersized at the Outer Drive at the connector location. Number 2, the Wolf Drain's experiencing notable downcutting and erosion from high flow velocities. That's happening on the other side of Outer Drive in the steeper and much larger channel between Outer Drive and Highway 401. Number 3, there's a number of these scattered throughout the study area. Those are local roadways designed with subdrains, shallow ditches, and culvert drainage systems. Many of these are experiencing some nuisance ponding and some of it is frequent and prolonged. Number 4, the Black Acre Drive, as I mentioned before, has a low-lying road sag that is prone to deep ponding and restricted access as a result of deficient drainage. Number 5, at the Hurley Relief branch drain along the north side of the abandoned railway, significantly plugged with sediment, or at least it was, and we'll get to that. That may have been already addressed. Number 6, the Washbrook drain has significant blockage, approximately half-meter depth, located immediately north of North Talbot Road. Heavy brush sedimentation is evident along the drain from North Talbot Road to County Road 46. Number 7, 6 concession drain enclosure between North Talbot Road and the Highway 401 corridor is a chronic maintenance issue with substantial sedimentation and standing water in the pipe. And number 8, Castlewood Court has been observed by residents to take a long time to drain. It's suspected that the existing enclosure from Castlewood to Wolf Drain may be partially blocked. Next slide, or actually on the following slide. So here, this was issue number 3 we talked about with the nuisance ponding. Talked about some of those existing local roadways that have pre-existing drainage systems that are swales with subdrain and culvert. And generally speaking, when those are new and functioning properly, they can function well. However, some of the Oldcastle area has been reconstructed and new storm sewers have put in that have abandoned this type of system, and we're recommending that some of these other local roadways do the same. And you can see where we're seeing some problems, particularly in some of those areas. Del Duca, Your Street are some very good examples where many times there's been some prolonged and frequent nuisance ponding. We have some pictures of that. We've seen it on numerous storms. There's the very large ones as well as some of the smaller ones. And the main reason for that is, as you look at some of the examples of the poor or the very poor culvert conditions, you can understand why the water is not moving very well through some of those where the culvert is crushed, or mostly crushed, or in some cases fully crushed, as those pictures clearly indicate. Next slide. Oh, sorry, go to the next one after that. So here's the modeling results again for the major 100-year storm event. You can see now that we're starting to see quite a few more problems, a lot of red nodes, a lot of excessive surface ponding. So I'll go through, as you look at the overall plan here, I'll go through some of the findings that we had. So our review of that dual drainage model for the study area revealed that the following deficiencies with the major overland storm drainage systems for conveying infrequent heavy storm events within the study area. So roadway sags lacking a proper overland flow route or proper overland flow outlet were identified along Faison Drive, Blackacre Drive, Halford Drive, Webster Drive, Del Duca Drive, Ure Street, Dumichelle Street, Morrow Drive, Rossi Drive, Roscon Drive, Olympia Drive, Brendan Lane, and DeChoco Court. In other words, quite a few of the roadways within the study area. The existing Wolf Drain along Outer Drive and east of Walker Road doesn't have sufficient capacity to convey stormwater from a 100-year event. We see that clearly with a lot of the red nodes there east of Walker along the Wolf Drain. The existing cross-section of the Washbrook Drain between North Talbot Road and 9 Concession Road does not have sufficient capacity to convey stormwater from the 100-year event. And the existing roadside drain along North Talbot Road between Weston Park and 9 Concession Road does not have sufficient grade and is very slow to drain. So next slide. So these next 3 slides here, I'll go over. They're providing depression maps, or they're providing additional context, I should say. They are depression maps. So what they're showing is a great visual and a great tool to show us where potentially water could build up. So it's showing all the low-lying areas, or the sags as we call them, or the sinkholes, where water is, or where areas are low, how much potential water could build up before it would start to spill. And so as we look at some of these maps, we can see, again, it starts to reflect what the same issues that the modeling is reflecting. We see some of the sag locations at Blackacre Drive, Morrow and Rossi. we can see those sags, and we can see the colors getting into the darker blues and even the greens and the yellows, which we're getting into half meter, above 0.3 meter surface ponding, and it's becoming a potential issue for access and flood risk. We also see some low-lying areas along Outer Drive and the connector. This is just upstream of the underside culvert crossing that we spoke of. And we've seen and observed water building up along the church property in that corner. So we've observed what this sink map is suggesting, or ponding in that low area as a result of that undersized culvert. There's also some low areas along the Wolf Drain at Walker. Again, we're seeing that same problem with insufficient drainage capacity under the major event, the 100-year event in that same location. So what we're seeing from this map, it's adding a bit of context, and it makes sense, and it matches with what the model is showing us when we look at the lay of the land with this particular visual tool. Next slide. So again, more of the same. When we look at Halford, Dumichel, we see some of these areas with potential for more excessive, or for some larger surface ponding depths. We see that as well along Ure Street and Del Duca as well on the east side of the page here. Next slide. These ones they get to be pretty colorful, and but they're not. I just do want to clarify again. This is a potential ponding. This extent of ponding, when we look into the pink colors, and we're talking about 1 meter depth, these are not suggesting that the water would build up that deep, but it's giving us an indication of a lack of an overland flow route. And what's driving these deeper depths is the barrier from the railway, as well as from Highway 401. And that's why you can see with those land barriers, you can see there's a potential for much more ponding. And what it's indicating to us is that there's a lack of an overland flow route. And as well as you'll see in some of the subsequent slides with the proposed solutions, is that it also shows us where is a good locations for ponds. Next slide. So this, as I mentioned, we were out there on numerous occasions, particularly when we were seeing some big rains in August 28, 2020. As I said, it was a 100-year storm. There were 115 mils over a 24-hour period. It was also it was also an intense storm. We had 75 mils over the first 6 hours of that storm in the early morning that exceeded a 25-year storm. As we can see from the pictures, that was the morning at 9:30 in the morning. After that, about 6 hours of rain, where that Black Acre sag was impassable and the road was closed. We see again that example at the church site where there was that low-lying area, and we can see that ponding building up onto the church site. This is just immediately upstream of the Outer Drive crossing near the connector roadway. Again, as mentioned, these are a couple pictures showing that frequent and prolonged nuisance ponding that was occurring on both Ure Street, Del Duca Drive. And as well, I added the picture of the Roscon Industrial Drive cul-de-sac, ponding on the edge of the curb here, not necessarily, or certainly in this case, not an access issue or unreasonable surface ponding under that type of event. But the reason I add that one in there is because, as you'll see in some of the subsequent or the upcoming slides with proposed solutions, we talk about adding new sewers, new ponds. We also talk about adding overland flow routing. And in that corner on the Roscon cul-de-sac is an example of where we're proposing to put a curb cut and regrade that land so that there is an overland route down Roscon, down into the Collins Drain. And I'll show that a little bit more. That'll be a little clearer with the upcoming slides. Next slide. So I'm moving into some of the proposed solution. And firstly, we want to talk about our overall approach. So there's two ways to deal with some of the drainage issues and how to improve the stormwater system capacity. One is to increase conveyance, which is increase the flow capacity of the system, and or to increase storage capacity. a couple simple graphs there just showing that relationship. If you have more flow capacity, bigger drains, bigger pipes, and you can convey more flow, you need less storage volume to. And conversely, if you have very low flow capacity or conveyance capacity with your drainage system, then you ultimately then need more storage volume to attenuate or dampen that peak flow. As you can see with that's the representation of the yellow being the volume under that exceeds that flow capacity of that system. So here, as I mentioned before, we're draining into town of Tecumseh, or I'm sorry, town of LaSalle and city of Windsor. So we are constrained, and we're at the high end of 3 watersheds. And we are quite constrained because we are limited to how much we can direct to those receiving drains in the neighboring municipalities. And so in doing so, we're somewhat challenged or limited that we can't simply add bigger drains and bigger pipes. And if we do so, then we have to offset that with storage. And that's what you'll see in some of the subsequent slides. That was, the solutions that's what has come out of this study. Next slide. We're actually move over 2 more slides. So just show the visual, and then I'll speak to those improvements. So this is an overall plan showing the improvements within the watershed. You've got the orange lines are representing new sewers. You've got the dash blue lines representing newer improved drains. Again, the yellow is representing areas where we're providing some overland flow routes, either by simple regrading, or perhaps even just by securing an existing easement through an existing area or an existing land that currently provides overland relief. So we're either establishing or securing or maintaining an overland route. So some areas have an existing unplanned overland route, and in those areas we're simply establishing that needs to be maintained as a proper easement so that it doesn't subsequently get obstructed with or built on or filled in. And then other areas, there's actually, as I showed with the Roscon industrial cul-de-sac, there's actually a curb cut and a little bit of regrading that's involved as part of that overland flow route improvement. So just to go through a summary of these improvements. So we're talking about new storm sewers along Faison Drive, Blackacre Drive, Del Duca Drive, Ure Street, Castlewood, Oldcastle Road. We're looking at wolf drain improvements that include a new auxiliary wolf drain that's draining between Roscon in the back of the properties, between Roscon Industrial Drive and Outer Drive. We're looking at a 1,200 diameter enclosure of the wolf drain along Outer Drive. Replacement of the storm sewer immediately east of Walker Road to add much needed additional capacity to drain that low-lying area that has been shown in the previous slides east of Walker Road. We are looking at remedial works along the steep segment of the wolf drain between Outer Drive and Highway 401, where we noted some high velocities and some erosion and downcutting occurring in that drain, or that section of drain. We're also looking at or recommending deepening of the Collins drain from Outer Drive to the Faison Drive storm sewer outlet, combined with storage via new Collins pond, including replacement of all the affected culverts along Collins drain. That's along the Highway 3 corridor. We're also recommending replacing and enlarging storm sewer outlets to the Wolf Drain at Moore Drive, Rossi Drive, Olympia Drive, Brendan Lane. Those are essentially going to provide more capacity to move that water away from those low-lying areas or those roadway sags and getting them over to into the Wolf Drain. We're looking to recommending to in place enlarge the existing storm sewer outlet to 6 concession drain for Halford Drive. Again, or Halford Drive, excuse me. Again, same thing. We're looking to move more water off the road and into the larger receiving drain downstream that has more capacity. We're recommending to replace and reroute the Hurley Relief branch drain enclosure to a new Hurley pond located along the south side of the railway. So that is by the there you go, east of East Concession. We have noted there's some significant sedimentation currently in the Hurley drain. I believe has been tendered. It may have been resolved, but that is a very flat area through there, all between County Road 46 and 8th Concession Road. That Hurley drain section is very flat. We would expect that it would have frequent sedimentation issues. And so as we were looking to do some local improvements and conveyance improvements along Ear Street and Del Duca, we're also recommending to reroute that to a new Hurley pond before it ultimately outlets back into the Hurley drain. We're also recommending Washbrook drain improvements, including immediate maintenance to remove the blockages and replacement of the culvert through Reston Park. We're recommending new Washbrook Downing Pond to attenuate flows from Washbrook drain. This is the pond. I'm sorry, I realize this overall doesn't have the names. We'll get into some of the subsequent slides that zoom in and have a little bit more detail, but yeah, that's the one right there. The Washbrook drain, or the Washbrook pond, is that triangular shaped pond. The other one that's more of a rectangular shape is a Downing Acres pond. So we'll kind of zoom in a little bit and speak to those. But that Washbrook Downing pond is providing some flow attenuation for the Washbrook drain and alleviating and dampening those flows that are going through that section of Washbrook drain between County Road 46 and North Talbot Road. As we said, where that existing drainage system doesn't have the capacity to convey that 100-year major storm event. We're also recommending DeMonte drain improvements, including replacement of existing storm sewer and culverts. This is in the Husky site there, north of, or just west of 8th Concession. Yeah. So the DeMonte drain improvements, including a replacement of existing storm sewer and culverts, cleaning of the open channel segment of the drain as required to provide a reasonable level of service, and the establishment of a new overland flow route towards 8th Concession drain. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, we are in a number of locations, we're recommending the establishment or securing or maintaining of an easement for overland flow routes at specific or strategic locations to ensure that we can move water away from the roadways and to ensure that it doesn't pond to an excessive depth, and to move that water, improve that conveyance through those overland flow routes. So next slide. So again, as with these slides, has quite a bit more detail into the sizing and the different pond names, as I've summarized. And just a few points that I wanted to show on this is one is we're showing as part of these recommendations, we're showing the phasing. So these plans are in the report and they're showing how things need to or should be sequenced. So you got W standing for Wolf Drain improvements, and then in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, representing the individual projects, if you will, as part of the recommendations and how those should be phased. Also, again, I've spoken about the overland flow relief at Roscon. You can see it more clearly here, where we're actually calling out at the cul-de-sac of Roscon Industrial Drive. We've got the yellow circle, and then we're calling out the 1.5 meter wide curb cut, regrading the boulevard. So that's on this plan, we're showing that more specifically as part of our recommendations. And I also wanted to point out on this slide that we have 4 options for the outflow of the Wolf from the Wolf Drain across the Highway 401 into the city of Windsor. And those individual slides, we got H2.4 or H2.1 to 2.4. We're showing that in the red. Those individual kind of individual options as part of the recommended solutions for this area, we're not presenting today. They are in the report. Ultimately, they're just there's an option that will limit the flow to the current allocated flow that the downstream receiver, the parkway, and the infrastructure that was done from the parkway, and the infrastructure that accepts water from the town of Tecumseh into the city of Windsor. That infrastructure has been designed and allocated to a certain flow rate. However, we are concurrently, as we present this tonight, there is a Turkey Creek watershed study that's ongoing. that we are also working on with Dillon Consulting. And there is a potential for some capacity to be freed up. And so there are some alternatives within the master plan that provide some flexibility to the town of Tecumseh and provide some options that may, one option will remove the Collins Pond. Another will remove both the Collins Pond and the Black Acre Pond, and will upsize some of the auxiliary Wolf Drain, and will upsize. In other words, as we were presenting in those graphs, if the Turkey Creek watershed study shows that we can release more flow out of the Wolf Drain watershed in through the city of Windsor, then there's other alternatives that will allow for more conveyance and less storage. And then that means that these properties will be, free. They will be freed up for development. Next slide. Again, these slide won't, again, showing more detail and zooming in, showing the pipe sizing for the storm relief flows, and as well as some notes on the overland routing, either just maintaining existing routes that are currently in place or doing a bit of regrading. It's calling out more specifics on how to implement those recommended solutions. Next slide. So here when we zoom in, we see again a lot of more of the details with the sewers and the sewer sizing and the ponds. One thing that I wanted to note in this slide and why I wanted to show it is that it's showing now some details or a couple of the ponds are development driven. Oldcastle Heights Pond, which is just north of North Talbot Road. Yeah, that Oldcastle Heights Pond. So that particular pond is serving the Oldcastle Heights development. And that we were coordinating with the design of that development that we know is a future development that's currently being proposed. And then that will actually connect and tie into the Hurley Pond. That's a pond that's put in there to provide attenuation and dampen peak flows and allow conveyance improvements for the town's current existing infrastructure, current stormwater system. And 9 Concession Pond, again, another example where that is primarily developer driven. So that will be is in place to service primarily future development. There is recommendation ultimately for the Hurley relief drain to be rerouted and to go into the 9 Concession Pond, but primarily that's a development driven pond. Next slide. And lastly, we talked about the Washbrook Downing Pond, the wedge-shaped pond, primarily as to attenuate and dampen flows that are coming from the Washbrook drain, and to dampen those flows as they continue on in the open drain section and then through Weston Park, as we discussed. And then there's a separate Downing Acres Pond, which is shown that would service just primarily would fully service the potential future development of the Downing Acres lands. There is an important note there that we're showing those as separate ponds. There is some flexibility there, and the ponds, that Downing Acre Pond could potentially be combined into one regional facility, the Washbrook Downing Pond. It would need to be a little bit deeper, a little bit wider, and it would eliminate the Downing drain section between North Talbot Road and where the boundary there begins at the north limit of the Downing Acres Pond. So that there's some flexibility there within the master plan to have it as 2 separate ponds or as one regional pond. Next slide, or actually move to the next one after that. So again, we've talked about some of these ponds that are development driven. This plan gives a bit of this plan shows a bit of or the areas that we're talking about. The 9 Concession Pond area in blue, the pink or reddish color being the Oldcastle Heights Pond, and the Downing Acres Pond in the yellow, those being the 3 primary ponds that are development driven. This slide is also showing some of the other areas with the dash red that are potential future development areas that would need to be we need the stormwater management as well, and they would have to follow typical prescribed standards from the the Windsor-Essex Regional Stormwater Master or Management Standards Manual. Next slide. When we talk about infill development, so a lot of the business park area that's already developed, or some lots that may still be vacant, or others that have built one phase and want to do an addition, or add a shed, or maybe just pave existing gravel. There's quite a few of these. Historically, they can be challenging to deal with, and you have an area that's been developed in somewhat of a fragmented fashion. And so now through this master plan, we've identified or we've recommended and are providing some guidance that's clear and concise and easy to apply. And we're also providing some flexibility on how to deal with different sites and providing very easy to use formulas that provide clear and concise criteria in terms of allowable release rates and storage volumes. So that will really streamline, we believe will really streamline reviews and approvals. It'll make things very consistent across the board from one property to the next. And where we provide a bit of variation is to be able to deal with different types of developments. So generally, those infill developments will fall under a normal criteria. And so they will follow, they will have these specific formulas where they simply plug in their impervious level and the overall property area, and then they have those design criteria, and that's consistent for most properties. But we did want to provide some flexibility where we want to have a little bit more stormwater management occurring. And when we talk about enhance, this would be where there's more consequence of a failure or an exceedance of the 100-year design storm, where we want a little bit of additional storage, a little bit of additional resiliency in the systems. And that will generally apply to areas or properties that are fronting the main roads, like North Talbot Road or Walker Road. So properties that are fronting those main arterial roadways will, generally speaking, will follow an enhanced criteria. Then we've also included for basic criteria where you have a property that is already at 60% developed. So it has much more limited opportunities now to add storage either on parking lots or on some green space with depressed, depressed grassed areas, or provide storage with parking lot. And so for those areas, we wanted to provide some reasonable and a practical criteria where they're simply now required, and there's formulas in the report that speak to this, where they're only addressing the additional area that they're putting in. So it's more of a relaxed standard for them. Of course, if they have the ability and opportunity to practically provide more storage and meet something that the normal criteria, then that's encouraged, but it wouldn't be required. And then lastly, there'd be the exempt, which is very small additions, less than 5% of the total area, or paving existing gravel areas. Those type of infill developments would typically be exempt. Next slide. So lastly, this is an overall summary of all the improvements that we've recommended, the cost, and then the implementation. So we're showing in this summary time frame, as we're showing a short, medium, long term. So these are not necessarily in a sequential priority, but more so sorted by watershed. And you've got short term, where we're defining generally between 1 and 2 years, medium term less than 10 years or within 10 years, and long term within 20 years. And then so we're showing time frame. We're also summarizing in here, not I think pertinent for tonight's presentation, but what easements would go with those projects, the subwatershed, the watershed it's in, and then the planning and the approval process. Some of them are under the Drainage Act, some are Schedule A projects, some are Schedule B. So that's identified in the report as summarized in this table. Then we're summarizing costs as well. And then as a short, medium, long term for a total of 32 million overall. Again, 8.6 million of that is the development driven stormwater projects, primarily the 3 ponds we talked about: Oldcastle Heights Pond, Downing Acres Pond, 9 Concession Pond. A few notes with some of these as we kind of zoom into just a few of these projects here. W1, the Wolf Drain Improvements, that project is being done under the Drainage Act. It's currently, it's been appointed to Landmark. It's ongoing. It has been progressing now concurrent with us getting closer and finalizing the Oldcastle Master Plan, which has basically fed into the the improvements that are required for the drain. So that's ongoing, and will be with a draft report that'll be following in the coming months. We got H1, that is the Hurley Reef branch drain improvements. We talked about how there's some significant sediment and it needs an immediate cleaning. That project was appointed under the Drainage Act to Root Engineering. Again, I know that the report's been approved. I understand it's been tendered. I don't know at this point whether that work has actually been done, but that was a high priority item that if it hasn't been gone to construction, then it's ready to. Maybe John can speak to that. We got 8C1, which is the DeMonte drain improvements. I understand that's been appointed to Dylan, and that project is or improvements to that drain are in progress under the Drainage Act. H2, which is the new storm sewer along Del Duca Drive. I understand that Stantec has done detailed design. I'm not sure if it's gone to tender and when it'll be constructed, but it's in the detailed design stage to some degree, and so that is also moving forward. And then lastly, I wanted to point out 9C.4, which is the extension of the Washbrook drain enclosure. So that is a large enclosure between Oldcastle Road and where the Washbrook drain crossing is occurring, we're showing that as a potential enclosure, and we're accounting for the cost of that enclosure. However, it's not necessary to enclose that drain. It can certainly remain as an open drain section. We presume that it would at some point be enclosed because there's some valuable property along North Talbot they may want to develop and enclose that. However, that $4 million price tag, it's not a project that's necessary. And with that, next slide, I'll open up to any questions.
So I don't lose my train of thought. There was a lot of information there, Mr. Michaud, that you talked about, but you made a reference in the southern portion of like Oldcastle, and it looks like it's potential for hamlet development, and basically the comment was as they develop, then we'll have to go back and deal with it, at a later date. Would it make sense though? I'm not saying that to do the project, because obviously we don't know what would be built there, but the concern that I have is that what we've seen in other areas where development has occurred, and then it's been quiet, and then 10 or 15 years elapse, and then you go out and you start dealing with storage or ponds and so forth. Then the battle starts with the developer, and we've seen that in areas. Does it make sense somehow, or is it just doesn't make sense to do preliminary and say, look, I mean, here's the site, and if it's hamlet development, how do you connect it onto a drain? Do we retain water or we just add it on to the downstream? Wouldn't it make sense to at least have something preliminary so that landowners or whoever goes to purchase, and it's not like we seem to be at the starting gate all the time, and then it becomes problematic for the municipality.
Yeah, I think we have so when you speak of preliminary design, both those options have a functional level sizing. And the reason we're showing both is that we're kind of looking at this area as a bit of a moving target. We don't know if this Downing Acres, and we've had discussions with the landowners, and whether it's future development 5 years down the road, 40 years down the road. The flexibility now is that if they want to develop tomorrow, they may not be able to right away. There's property acquisition now that the town has to implement these recommendations and these next steps and acquire land for that Washbrook downing pond, which is just immediately downstream of that Downing Acres area. And so if the Downing Acres would like to develop tomorrow, they could put a stormwater pond on their lands and they can deal with their stormwater and they can proceed with development. If they want to kind of coordinate with the regional approach, then there's a bit more land acquisition that's required. There's compensation, obviously, for that benefit that Downing Acres would be getting by having their stormwater dealt with offsite, and the landowner for that larger area would, that benefit we would expect would be passed on to the the lands that where we're proposing the Washbrook Downing Pond and that larger footprint. So it's a bit of a moving target. So we're presenting some flexibility where there's, depending on timing and depending on, you can go either way. They're both going to work. They're both going to address stormwater management, and there's flexibility for that. Once that moving target, once it's nailed down, and it's a bit clearer when that if and when that development is ready to go ahead, then you've got two options that work, that address stormwater.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to avoid situations like we have on Manning Road as a great example. I mean, if you're dealing with multiple developers, that's even crazier. And if you're dealing with one, sometimes it's simplified. But and what I'm trying to do as well is that in the future, it's just trying to avoid additional costs, to any projects, and in particular, costs have been borne by certainly the municipality, because we've seen the difficulty, in developing. I mean, you've kind of, in the development or in the project itself, you've identified obviously some significant shortfalls and so forth. But that would be my biggest concern, is this, that if it's all into the drainage area, it's already indicated that it's for hamlet development and so forth. It's not zone or anything in that, and it could be way down the road, but just kind of a sense that you're not always, when you go into these new areas, it almost as if you're starting from the very beginning again.
Yeah, no, I think when you speak to the Manning area, multiple developers here, there is the option for the Downing Acres property, the Washbrook Downing Pond property, and then through the implementation of the master plan and coordination with those two landowners and the town, it could be one regional pond. But if there's problems with timing, or this is where the separate Downing Acres pond is shown, because that development can go ahead and it can store its water on its own site. But there's certainly opportunity for a regional pond to hold the Downing Acres water. That it would be off-site, and the fair compensation for that benefit would have to be resolved and agreed upon. And otherwise, there's stormwater can be dealt with right on their property. And there's so we feel we're not going to get into it. We believe with that flexibility, we don't get into that potential concern where you got multiple landowners and things are stalled and not able to move forward.
And then the other question that I have too is that you made reference on the Wolf Drain and for those that are actually draining into Turkey Creek, where there's already retention within the town itself. And you had mentioned opening that up and reducing retention and increasing flow. Did I hear that correct? The only issue, the issue I would have is obviously we'd have to let LaSalle know what we're doing, obviously.
Oh yeah.
And we need to develop, and then there's more developable lands in that. Maybe Phil can better answer this one too, is as I've been developing in other parts of the community, it's always important that wherever you develop, you retain your water, and then we've we put a lot of underground storage in many of the areas, and that is that. So I'm a little confused in terms of not worrying about retention, opening up more flow versus other areas where we said, oh no, we're going to hold back flow and ask developers to put in ground storage.
Yeah, I'll, maybe Phil will speak to that, but I'll provide an answer to that. So you did hear that correctly. The default option one, if you will, is the assumption that we are going to maintain and what was allocated as part of that parkway design, and we're going to maintain that flow, and we're not going to increase flows above the existing condition. So and that is, as you said, that is typically the process. You can't make things any worse than what's there. You don't want to adversely impact those downstream receivers. That's certainly the approach throughout the master plan. And as I mentioned, and as we look to do some improvements to the local system and to move water off the roads, we're finding it challenging to find areas to do that with a pre-existing area. This is a retrofit development, particularly on the Wolf Drain watershed. It's a retrofit situation. And now you have to go in and take some areas, and we've had some correspondence, and we've gone back to the drawing board where we had a property slated for expansion of a pond, but then it's encroaching on phase 2 of an existing development, and that's very problematic. So we've landed in areas where there's no development, but these are areas where they're right on the corner of Black Acre and Outer Drive, for instance. There's no development there, but that would be a prime area for development. But it's simply there's very limited options, and we need storage. We need to improve conveyance and get it off the road, mitigate flooding and access issues, and we have limited areas to put it in. So that was one area that made sense. That was, but there is the potential, and I say the default is to hold back and to maintain existing flows and not add any more flows through Windsor or through LaSalle. But LaSalle is very much aware of what we're proposing as options in the master plan. They're very much aware and part of the Turkey Creek watershed study. And we'll have to see as we do that modeling, if there's excess capacity, if the city of Windsor may want to, if there is excess capacity, the city of Windsor may want to utilize some of that. Does it make more sense to move more water and then have a larger, more infrastructure through LaSalle? Or do we want, the Turkey Creek watershed study will look at these things. We'll address, one, do we have extra capacity? And if we have it, do we want to convey more out of Oldcastle, or does it still make more sense to hold that water in Oldcastle in the headwaters, as we said? And that generally is and I don't want to be biased to which option we will settle on. Again, all the options are potentially valid, but it may make more sense to store water in Oldcastle, albeit that it's going to eliminate the potential for development right along Black Acre and Outer Drive.
Okay, well, and that was my fear, my point too, because I'll get Phil, I'll get you to to answer that. But I know that the town of LaSalle in particular, with IRCA on the Turkey Creek watershed piece, they've got to many developments that are in abeyance right now because of that. So, but in the same token, for us, obviously, I don't want all that water to impede and create some havocs for LaSalle, but in the same token, I don't want to impede the ability for us to also, hamper our development in what's left in that corridor. But it looks like you've got a handle on that, and so that's good.
Yeah, again, we're trying to. Oh, go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to add a few additional comments just for those people that might be tuning in as well. And I think Alan had alluded to it, but the town is part of a larger watershed study for Turkey Creek with the city of Windsor, LaSalle, as well as IRCA that's reviewing that. And so I think some of the options that were created as part of this master plan, one, the baseline approach of what we're discharging now into the downstream, but during throughout that Turkey Creek analysis, we'll review, is there any additional capacity? If not, what improvements are required so that the town could release? And does it make financial sense to do improvements within the Oldcastle area as far as storage and ponds, or does it make sense to do conveyance improvements in LaSalle or in Windsor or further downstream? So, you know, we have a kind of a standalone solution, but we're still keeping an eye open to other possibilities as that other study continues forward.
Well, it sounds like you've got that under control.
Well said, Phil. Yeah.
Further questions or comments, members of council? Councilor Jobin and Councilor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, Alan, for the detailed report. So we're going into a year 3 of public sessions and studies. So sometimes people tuning in, they feel like, oh, this is just happening. No, this has been a long road of studies and communication with everybody, all the landowners affected. A couple things that I know come to mind for some of the residents is the scale of the ponds, but also what would they look like aesthetically? Would they be more naturalized or finished with a gabion stone? That's a couple of questions I've received recently. And again, of course, the costs associated to and where we are at with our grantable funds. Those are my two at this time.
Go ahead, Mr. Bartnick.
Sure. Thank you, Worship. I'll take a crack at this, and Alan can supplement if I miss out. So the level of detail I think contained in the master plan wouldn't really identify what the landscaping features would be. However, you know, through detailed design or through development agreements that come forward, we have shown in the past an interest in landscaping and perhaps having it naturalized in some instances, as well as integrating it with not only the proposed development, but other features, right? If it's adjacent to a parkland, is there any way to integrate, you know, trails around the pond with other trails within the community as well? So we always keep those in mind during the detailed design as well. You know, the MOE does set forth some guidelines on the kind of configuration of the ponds, as well as the sloping of the embankments for safety reasons as well. So there is some criteria that we do have to follow, but I don't think those details would be available at the master plan level.
Thank you. And second to that, Phil, was the funding and costs associated to.
Yep, through you, Your Worship. So the master plan does identify about 32 million in works that are required. And it's still kind of a mixed bag on the available tools of how funding will take place, right? There's going to be some improvements that are on municipal drains. There's going to be some that's on municipal infrastructure. There's some that's going to be tied directly to proposed developments. So I think finalizing the master plan is one step, and then trying to identify and implement kind of or kind of create an implementation strategy as well as the funding strategy would kind of be the next step moving forward. So I hope that answers the question, Councillor Jobin.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Just on Councillor Jobin, on the not the drains, but the ponds and the configuration. I know it's too early and so forth, but something just clicked to me is that we're still fairly close to the airport, and I know that the design of ponds and so would we still. Because I know under northeast winds, flight path does come over the Oldcastle area. And so would that play into it as well? That, it's not just a matter of having an open pond to attract migratory birds, geese and so forth. So is that area distance enough from the airport? or is it close by? Because I know like Manning Road, for example, it's flight path and airport and the design of the ponds are critical as well.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So in our in the report, we speak to that. We reference the Upper Little River Master Plan. It was speaking, and of course, the Oldcastle Master Plan ties into that larger Upper Little River Master Plan. It was having those or discussing that in quite a bit more detail, and also showing a map, and we were referencing that map, and what it is the wildlife corridor, and it's a 4-kilometer radius around the airport that's saying stay out, right? Or anything within here, you've got those potential concerns with bird strikes that you're speaking of. So we're outside of that radius. We are still recommending that there's consultation before design in case something changes or there's still some concern that the airport has, but the expectation is that we are outside of that corridor and we should be able to have larger bodies of water. But again, the consultation is there. If there is some issues there, then again, that would be detailed design where the bodies of water would have to be more narrow or more naturalized to get away from that large fetch and the very, the nice immature vegetation that they like to feed on. So those would be considerations. Again, we're outside of that 4-kilometer radius. Shouldn't be required, but we did recommend that there's consultation.
Yeah, just for for the benefit of those who are landowners or certainly even developers, is to keep that seed in mind, because of proximity and restrictions. And some folks think that a drainage pond is a big hole and just holds water and call it a day, but there's more to it than that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Councillor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to Liz and Alan, thank you very much for the presentation. I do wish to kind of echo the point that the mayor raised, I guess, on kind of looking to the future for development and trying to implement, appropriate items within this stormwater plan, which it sounds like you've kind of been thinking about it. But again, I just really want to echo that, that's quite important because it can also certainly spark development and benefit us all. Just, I guess, maybe more so comments, recognizing that we are sending, after tonight, we wish to send this kind of report out to, basically out to our community and allow them to kind of respond and review it. I appreciate your efforts with the modeling. And I know you kind of indicated on slide 10 in the presentation tonight about this concept of calibrating. I think it'll be very good for our residents to also see that confirmation of the modeling being kind of consistent to some of the observations that were made over the years. So I don't know if there's any possibility of kind of layering or overlapping kind of the modeling to the observations that were made and show that the hotspots in modeling are kind of consistent to the hotspots that you observed from the residents' input. I think that will give them confidence in the models, and then an important part in this process altogether. And then suggest, if you could, further layer it with the recommendations you've left on, I think it was slide 25. The overall scope of kind of what's been planned out. Kind of showing how this plan is really trying to attack those points of kind of concern, or again, what I refer to as those hotspots. I think that would be, quite attractive to the reviewers and help them understand that, what we've tried to do here is really address problems that we are seeing and observing. So I leave those kind of as recommendations. I think the point that Councillor Jobin brought up with regards to the ponding, my only other concern was, and I know this is probably something that's going to happen in the future, is capacity versus the overall rainfall year rating. This with climate change, we're seeing whatever 100-year rainfall event or 50 rainfall event, whatever it is. A lot of people kind of questioning those definitions of rainfall events. So I think that would be quite important. But other than that, please, thank you very much for your efforts, and hope this input maybe helps. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going
Manager.
to say thank you for your comments, Councillor Aldenhoff. And I will point out to your comments, the report, it becomes a much more technical report. As you've seen through this slide, there's a lot of information. As we're going through the solutions, the report speaks to it and speaks to the technical components, and has a specific appendix where we talk about the calibration, and we're doing exactly that, matching observed image, sorry, I'll take a step back. We have observed images and pictures of some of those large events that occurred. I had mentioned the one in January 2020 and the August 28th, 2020 as well. So we were out there observing it, and we taken those pictures, and we've shown that and showed the model superimposed with the pictures at the location at the exact time of the picture, as well as the time in the model simulation, and show those to match. And that was kind of part of our validation. Now, prior to those events, we were also out there taking pictures, but we had a year's worth of flow data. So we're also showing in that Appendix C, which is talking all the nuts and bolts and all the details of the calibration. It's showing that. It's also showing how we're matching up with the observed data at those 5 flow monitoring locations. Again, that ran from September 2018 to September 2019. And we didn't get 100-year events, but we got a couple 5-year events, or at least one 5-year event, and then a couple other, good size events that were meaningful, and between 25 to 50 mils that were meaningful, and we can calibrate to. And so all that is in the appendix if anybody cares to read it. And so that is in there, and that is available. And then the other point you made, we also have some discussion in terms of climate change resiliency. Again, it gets technical in terms of the storms we use, the approach, the modeling approach we use, the soil conductivity values we used. I didn't include that in today's presentation. It gets a little bit more of the details. It is discussed in the report as well.
Go ahead, Councillor Aldenhoff.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Alan. No, I'm not. What I'm trying to do is maybe just what I always call them. The kind of the slappy in the face type slide, which really shows, maybe just one figure, which really, presents to the residents, because I recognize, I see it myself. We're all inundated with appendices and a lot of information, and we'll probably lose a lot of the readership just because they'll be inundated with technical content that they don't know what's going on. But a simple one image, which kind of illustrates, these were the modeling hotspots, these were the observed hotspots, and these are where we're kind of be paying our attention, really, which can appear on one page, would be really attractive, I think, to the reviewers. So please, I'm not trying to say anything negative. I know you've done a lot of work on this. It's been a multi-year report, and I can understand and appreciate that. But I also recognize the critical importance of really, giving that one pager, which just shows everything out. So anyways, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments? Councillor Dowie?
Thank you, Worship. Just a very quick comment. I want to give my thanks to Alan and Liz for the public meetings that they hosted. They were very informative. I really learned a lot attending them. I know it's been a while now, but they were just fantastic over at the Chicharro Club. And I want to say thank you very much, and thank you for all the hard work to bring us to the conclusions today.
Thank you.
Okay. No further questions or comments. Certainly, I want to also extend on behalf of Council Administration our thanks to Alan and Liz, and certainly Phil and John, for, this is intense work. And I, sometimes, to Councillor Altenhoff's point, an image is worth 1,000 words. And I know the heat sink maps that John and Phil, you guys worked on the flooding and potential on the lake levels. That was in your face, as Councillor Altenhoff would say to the general public. And so it's at the end of the day, it makes our job as politicians to move the agenda forward to do the right thing for the community and make sure that the investments are there. And so certainly on behalf of all of us, thank you. This is a really in-depth a report that is very timely. As you know, we're into the midst of climate change, and we've heard it from the folks, and I know more so Councillor Jobin as the Ward 5 councillor, hearing it from a lot of the landowners in that area that they've noticed in the last few years that ponding has been a huge issue, and so the report's very timely, and we're looking forward to continuing that dialogue with the general public, especially those folks in the Oldcastle area. So with that, members of council, if I could have obviously a report, I'm going to bring that forward. There's no communications to deal with, but on the report, if the report PWES 2208 Oldcastle Stormwater Master Plan, filing the notice of study completion to be received, and that the notice of study completion be advertised in the local newspaper and the town's social media accounts to initiate the mandatory 30-day public review record. A motion on the recommendation, Deputy Mayor Bichetti and Councillor Dowie. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Don't believe there's any further business to deal with in this this item. So then adjournment is certainly in order. Members of council, moved by Councillor Alton Haas, supported Councillor Tonio. Adjournment. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And that's it. So thank you very much once again, Alan and Liz, and
My pleasure.
looking forward to the consultation when that ends, and we'll happy to reconvene and have that conversation at a later date.
Sounds good.